My recent Sitting with Sue podcast, The Mentorship Puzzle Balancing Culture and Strategy, left us on a bit of a cliffhanger with the question around should mentoring be an internal or an external function, left completely untouched. Well, I couldn't leave it there. So we now have part 2 with Luke Brannigan from Crawford & Company and Stephen Helman from Exchange Street expanding on that subject. So firstly, let's turn to you, Luke, and let's have your thoughts, please.
I think if you move mentoring out of the organization, then I think that brings with it positives and negatives. The positive is that essentially you get potentially a much broader scope of people who you can engage with outside the organization. So I've still continue to mentor people inside Crawford and externally, whereas previously there was a mentoring program internally and I was mentoring someone who was within the organization. I think that does definitely bring benefits because you can give that benefit from your knowledge and experience. Okay. Basically the core of mentoring. So if you work in the same organization, then you can say, oh, well, I know this person can help you do this, or this person can help you unlock that, because you're both working within that same sort of corporate environment and both understand the culture. That brings with it positives and negatives. If you bring the mentoring outside of the organization, you have a much broader audience, a much broader demographic to connect with. And a lot of the time, you see that someone else has got a much different perspective on something that you might have a conversation with someone inside your own organization, and someone externally might have a completely different take on it. And I think that's really good because it just brings a diversity of opinion, diversity of thought. And again, as I said, I've worked with people who I've mentored formally and informally, and we both worked at the same organization at the same time. And you've been able to share that insight. So you can point that person to go and talk to this person in the organization, what you need to approach it in this particular way. And I think that can be really useful. But I'm also taking some of the potential negatives away from that intra-organizational mentoring. If you bring in an external element, I think that's really positive and that can be really healthy.
This is open to the discussion generally. How do you actually make more of that external element of it? Do you create a match to your mentor app somewhere along the line? Do organizations just hold a list of names or people who volunteered, or what could it actually look like? Should it be a role for CILA and the CII as facilitators, or is it something from an overarching sort of point of view that the organisations such as CILA and CII ought to facilitate, not actually do, but to have an involvement in order to create the ability for more external mentors to then work to complement the internal?
It's difficult because I think as much as some organizations see mentoring as a tick in the box, I think some professional bodies also see that as well. I don't think there's anything necessarily intrinsically wrong with that, but if you're going to do mentoring, you have to do it properly. Creating or buying a platform or plug into your website that allows you to have a mentoring facility or a matchmaking facility, that's fine. What I'd really like to see is that professional bodies actually maybe even holding the mentors a little bit to account. Say, well, you've been matched with this person. Where have you gone with it? What's the benefit? Whether you like it or not, you always come back to return on investment. You always come back to what's been the outcomes. You talk about developing people through an outcomes-led approach. Having a mentoring program is brilliant, but does it actually achieve anything? I think as much as organizations need to ask themselves that, and I think actually mentees need to ask either the organizations or the firms or the professional bodies that's actually organizing it, where is our return on investment? Is this even worth doing?
Stephen, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it would be great if professional bodies could be the conduit and could match adjusters with mentors or mentees with mentors, because I think there are people out there who might even want specific help on a topic, business interruption, for example, and they can go onto a platform or some sort of bolt on, as Luke said, and okay, this person is offering mentoring on business interruption. I'm not looking for somebody who's going to be a long-term mentor, or maybe they will, but I think that will probably get more people from a mentoring perspective involved, if they can say, okay, I'm not looking necessarily to be a mentor of somebody's career for a long time, but I can offer like a specific thing, um, or two specific things. And then there'll be the people who are more open to being more long-term mentors. But yeah, I think there's demand out there for emerging talent to that want to be engaged with mentors. So I think it would make sense to me if there were professional bodies were able to do that. And as Luke said, give people an extra perspective outside of their organisation or their particular way of doing things, and open up to more a multitude of views on how to do things. So I think it would be really beneficial. And I take Luke's point definitely. What is the return on the investment? What's the outcome here? But I think to some extent, for professional bodies, what are they there for? They're there partly to kind of uphold the standards of and promote the profession to become, you know, um, technically better. So I think if they can facilitate that, not just through exams and offering exams.
So one last sort of main question now, therefore, is does mentoring make for better adjusters?
I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. When you say better adjusters, what do you mean exactly? That's the first
I
thing.
suppose to a certain extent, are they more rounded in their approach to adjusting rather than does it make them actually better being able to calculate whether a roof is repaired or replaced, for example?
I think definitely more rounded, because if you look at how you're managing talent, you want your emerging talent in your organization to be connected in with the senior leadership. You want them to understand really where the business is going and all those things that those conversations should unpack for you, particularly if you're early in your career journey. The risk, I guess, is that lots of mentoring creates lots of career mobile adjusters, and probably Steve will think that's a really great thing. And I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, look, I've moved around the profession and I've moved into different roles, and having those sorts of conversations has definitely unlocked a lot of things in my career. So I guess I'm putting this across from the organization's perspective is that, yeah, mentoring is good. I think it should be encouraged. We want people to connect with other people in the profession, in the organization. We want those people to be connected with the overall strategy of the business, to be linked in with the senior leaders and the sort of subject matter experts in the organization. And the risk is that it does expose those people to opportunities outside of the business. But my sort of answer to that a lot of the time is, when I'm challenged on how we're managing talent, is that we should be creating an environment where those people want to stay with us, right? And if they do see that they are being developed and they're being mentored, then they're more likely to stay with the organization. And I think you've got a bit of a tightrope to walk when it comes to, do we do lots of development? Well, if you do lots of development, we also create potentially a flight risk. But the other side of that is you're investing in that person so they want to stay. And that's a really difficult part to manage in terms of talent management. That's a really difficult element of that sort of process to manage, because retention is part of that overall sort of cycle of talent management. You want people to come into the business, you want to develop them, you want to move them into bits of the business where they can create the most value, and also you want to retain them as well. I think that's got to be part of the overall conversation. And a lot of the time, Steve, I don't know if you agree with me on this, is that a lot of people that I'm talking to want to stay with the organization. And a lot of the time, it's not actually a conversation about money.
100%. And I would say the flip side of people asking you, well, what happens when we develop this person and we leave? You're going to lose people if you don't develop them, because somebody else will probably be offering them that, or there'll be another opportunity in the market where they feel like, the potential opportunity for development is there. Almost more than money, the thing that people want is development. When people feel that they're stagnant, that's when they start looking around. If you can continually challenge people and continually develop people, then they are going to be more loyal to your organization. And it might not always feel like it, because you will lose some of those people probably. But if you can create a culture whereby, on top of the development, people want to stay and they can see the opportunities where they can use their skills that they've learned, then you will retain people. And more than that, you'll be seen in the market as a good school and a place where the talent is your adjusters of quality, and you'll get a reputation for that, I think. And I spoke to a talent acquisition person or a HR person in one of the bigger companies recently, and they said, "Is the problem that we might lose people when we develop them?" But we always, and I don't know whether they were being facetious, but they said, we sort of see that as, well, maybe that's a bit of a service to the market in a way, that we are developing these people and okay, we'll lose some of them, but at least we've trained up some good adjusters that might go to, sure they'll go to our
Yeah.
competitors, but they're raising standards generally. Um, I'm sure they prefer to keep them. But if you don't ultimately develop people, they'll leave anyway.
I can't remember who it was. She said, and again, it sort of links in with what you're saying, Steve, is that, the conversation is, well, what if we develop all these people and they leave? There's sort of a counterpoint to that as well. What if we don't develop them and they
Yes.
stay, right? So you made a really good point. So one of the things that certainly I'd like to achieve through the rest of my career is that we're actually raising the bar, exactly as you said, raising the bar technically. And that's really important. And I think it comes to a point where you've actually got to say, we're doing as much as we can. And, a lot of the time, and we've seen this at Crawford, and I'm sure other firms have seen that elsewhere. A lot of the time people go and they come back, actually, because maybe they like the culture, maybe they don't like the culture elsewhere. I think good talent always shines through, and good organizations doing good training, good development will always be a beacon for that talent.
Absolutely. And it's a big selling point for me as well. Sorry, Sue. When, you can say to somebody who's looking and maybe considering between a couple of companies, I can say, well, this company, I can genuinely say, will develop you, they will invest in you. And that'll be beneficial for your future career. And that gets out in the market as well. When people are looking, they think, I'd really like to work for XYZ because I know from others that there's going to be opportunities to develop my career there.
So it's also an element of a two-way street, though, isn't it? Because this is another conversation I've been having, is that the company needs to invest in the employee, but the employee also needs to invest in their own career. It's a two-way process, or at least I've always seen it as a two-way process. And that
Mm.
way, everybody comes out with benefits from both sides.
I think a lot of the rhetoric in maybe the last 10 years, and, we talk about stuff like the war for talent, right? War for talent is a sort of a term that we've used in the last probably 5 years. You'll always have a war for talent where you've got a mismatch between supply and demand, okay? Because the firms are going to be looking to attract the best adjusters that they can. You create more adjusters, you develop the more adjusters, and you raise the bar, like Steve has said, and suddenly some of those issues do tend to go away. One of the things that, if you read about talent, you read about the war for talent, which is something, which a phrase actually really from the 1990s, when there's a paper by some McKinsey consultants called the war for talent. That's where we get it from originally. And that is talking about the mismatch of executive leadership talent in the US exiting the workforce, who are baby boomers, right? So you have the people who are around the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of the senior leaders leaving. Who's coming up behind them? And we've got exactly the same issues. As 20 years later, we have exactly the same conversations in the business. One of the things that the war for talent sort of paper originally talks about is, why would a bright, energetic, ambitious person come and work for your firm? Translate that. What's our employee value proposition? What are we actually offering people? Why would they come to work here instead of the firm next door? And that's really where we're pushing a lot of our training developments, a lot of our talent stuff, is we're trying to create that value proposition and make that as good as we possibly can. So we will attract talent to us rather than necessarily having to acquire it.
So you're making it very clear internally and externally then what it is you want to achieve, both yourselves as a firm and also for the people that are working for you. That, I think, goes back almost to the very first point, that you have to have a clear set of objectives, because otherwise mentoring or any of the other talent tools just won't work because you don't know what you're actually aiming for.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, and it comes back to having that real strategic focus on what you're trying to achieve. And I mean, the problem is doing really great training and really, really great talent development, whether it's through specific programs or whether it's just a general approach to developing people through the organization. Doing that really well is really difficult. And that's something that I think we've certainly found where we've been looking at how we train our people, what tools we use to actually do that, how we actually deploy that in the organization. It's really difficult to get that right. And you've got to have an understanding of what people in the business will do, what they want to do, what tools they want to engage with, rather than, for example, having training on teams where you've got everyone on mute, everyone with the cameras off. That is not going to create a really engaging experience for anyone who's a learner in the organization. And we're definitely moving away from that. And we're doing as much as we can face to face in a live environment, and also creating what we call asynchronous tools. So we've got pre-recorded video content, a lot similar to what you've got as well, Sue. So it's part of a bundle of solutions which we're creating for our colleagues essentially. And also we're looking to move that out into clients as well, because they're having the same conversation with us about how are we developing people and can we use some of that.
It is a very full toolbox that you need. So, Stephen, a last word from you. Is there anything else that you wished you'd had the chance to say?
Not really. Just to reiterate Luke's point about attracting talent and being able to say, why would an adjuster doing the same role at another company join your company? And if you can make a good case for that and have the benefits to hand about what you offer in terms of mentoring, development and training, then that's going to be a big pull factor. So I think if companies can ask themselves that question, just that simple question, why would an adjuster join us as opposed to any other company? And maybe that can help sort of feed into what their objectives are and strategies, which is so important when considering mentoring.
And it can't always be because that firm is paying the most amount of money.
Absolutely not. No.
And I think that's definitely where I've definitely seen a change. And I'm not involved in recruitment day to day, but that's definitely where I've seen a big change in the last couple of years, is actually money actually starts to not become so much of an issue.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, that is really, really interesting factor. So, well, nearly the final word is now going to be from me. I just have to say thank you to both you, Luke and Stephen, because that's been a very, very interesting session. You've been listening to a Sitting with Sue Insurance Questions Answered podcast that I hope you found really informative. I certainly have. Check out my website at www.suetaylor.co.uk for other podcasts available.